Hello, everyone. Mike from DynamicPoint. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be starting here in a short minute. Today's agenda for our webinar is automating AP invoices, specifically using the Microsoft Teams interface. We'll jump around a little bit, show other options, but for the most of the next half hour, we're going to be focusing on how you could leverage the Teams platform to automate accounts payable invoices, specifically with the DynamicPoint Easy AP 365 application. So we'll give everyone a quick minute here to join. I will also do my best to monitor the chat window as we're going through this. So if you have any questions, I will do my best to address those either at the end or as I have breaks throughout the presentation. Okay, I have about a minute after. We have a lot to go through and unfortunately just a half an hour here to keep it brief. So I'll go ahead and get started. So just a quick introduction of who DynamicPoint is and what it is that we do. DynamicPoint creates applications on top of the Office 365 framework. So from an analogy sake, we are basically an app development company, very similar to an app that resides on your mobile phone, whether it be an iPhone or an Android device. And I'm sure we've all installed products on those on a phone before. And as you install those products, it typically asks you if you could use various services of your mobile platform, including the camera, notification services, location services, things like that. And that is very much our approach from an application development company. Again, we are leveraging products within that framework and then leveraging all of the functionality that comes with the Office 365 suite. Office 365 has not been around that long. We've been around a little bit longer, since 2009. So we used to create products on top of SharePoint, and then about 5 or 6 years ago, have recreated all of our products for specifically the Office 365 framework. All of our products do offer integration with various ERP and CRM systems. We have various integrations with all of those and leverage the APIs provided by those products to, again, automate various business applications using that framework with real tie-ins to your ERP or CRM system. Keep it going. As far as our application lineup, today our focus will be the invoice automation product. The scope of this application is automation of invoice receipt, specifically coming on the accounts payable side from vendors for either PO or non-PO invoices, workflow and routing, OCR capabilities, assignment of such things as accounts and other financial objects within your ERP, and then ultimately bringing that transaction in as an invoice that is ready to be posted and paid in your ERP system. We also have a portal product which enables a customer, vendor, and employee portal as well as an employee expense. Those are unfortunately out of scope for today, just given that we have a limited amount of time, again, focusing on invoice automation. A little bit more about our product approach. So we're again leveraging this Office 365 platform, and our app is deployed to Azure. So again, it's 100% cloud-based and leveraging the platform provided by Microsoft. All of our products have their own, of course, functionality to them. They are installed as what are known as SharePoint apps. So SharePoint is providing us the security, the branding, the document management, and really the user interface and framework for our products. For workflow, Microsoft gives us another tool by the name of Power Automate, previously called Flow. For mobile applications, specifically such things as check request or mobile approval, things of that nature, we're using the Power Apps platform. For capturing additional details, maybe vendor onboarding and things like that, we're using the Forms application. And then last but not least, for reporting and analytics, we're using Power BI. So all of these generally come with most Office 365 subscriptions. So just a little note there, we're not necessarily selling any licenses for Office 365 with our products. We're adding to an ecosystem that our customers already own and use. Okay, enough of the introduction. Now we're going to talk about the invoice automation process. We'll be going through various aspects of this, again, focusing on the Microsoft Teams. So this will be the framework for our demo over the next 25 minutes here. Generally speaking, invoice automation comes down to three major steps, if you will. First of all is getting that invoice from a vendor, or in other words, the receipt of that invoice. Invoices could come in from various different manners, and they're ultimately all coming into this library or a SharePoint library that's being provided by your SharePoint Office 365 subscription. Vendors could email these invoices in. We could establish check request forms if those invoices are being submitted from within the company in sort of a distributed buying environment. They could be mobile uploads. We could have portals for entry, obviously the traditional scanning to libraries. If it is received in paper apply, drag and drop, uploads from Teams. All of those are options on how you can capture the invoice that's ultimately coming from those vendors into your Office 365 environment. And that's really the first step in the process. By bringing that invoice in, it's now obviously digital and captured, and it could be, saved for future use, repository for that information, archived, etc. So taking that paper, getting rid of the necessity to keep files for those and bringing it into a digital library. The second step in the invoice automation process, loosely we call processing. This can involve various steps, including the application of templates in our product for such thing as defaulting GL accounts or other financial dimensions. It can involve workflow for routing and approval. Reviewers could also be involved in the assignment of those invoices to accounting aspects or accounting objects. And then as well as bringing in the capability of OCR to automatically recognize fields from those invoices so they don't need to be manually typed in or translated. That could be done in more of an automated OCR fashion. And then the last step in the process is bringing that invoice into your ERP or your accounting system, where we're usually going to do one of three types of transactions. The type of transaction we're going to create is really going to depend on the type of invoice it is. If it's for a PO, then we're either going to create an invoice match or a receipt match, depending if it's a two-way or three-way match PO. If it's a non-PO invoice, then we're going to go ahead and create a payable transaction such that could be paid directly to the vendor without the need for a PO. So again, really much depends on how those invoices are coming in, as well as if you're using the purchasing components of the ERP or they're just coming in as miscellaneous payables. So enough of the introduction, we'll go ahead and get to the demo. Let me go ahead and get out of that, and we will go ahead and share our dashboard. So this is our AP processing dashboard. I have various calls to action on this dashboard. All of these calls to action are ultimately corresponding to those three steps that I just mentioned. So this is invoices coming into the system in the nature of received invoices. This is my processing queue representing those that are going through workflow or coding. And then last but not least is just a link to the ERP product where I could see those that have already integrated and come into the product. Other things I could do, I have a dashboard here leveraging Power BI, showing unapproved invoices by vendor total as well as an aging. So this is obviously a SharePoint site. I'm looking at it just from a browser perspective. As promised today, we wanted to go ahead and focus on the Teams interface. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of the web browser and bring over Teams, and that's going to be the basis for most of our time today on how we could do everything within Teams. So the first step that we wanted to talk about is submitting those invoices. So we're going to show various methods for submission. So I just have a Teams channel set up here. I have some various tabs across the top, but let's start with the first one, and that I want to have an employee within my organization upload an invoice directly to Teams. So that's a pretty simple process. I could go ahead and upload, find the invoice on my computer, and go ahead and upload it. So that seems simple enough. What is happening now in the background that invoice has been kicked off, or received is we're performing an OCR process and bringing this directly into our application. So in addition to recognizing all of the fields that are on this sample invoice, so here's my sample invoice that I just submitted, we're extrapolating such information as the invoice number, the date, obviously the amount associated to that, and then we're applying a template and bringing that right into the product. I will show you the results of all of that in a minute, but for the sake of mentioning other submission methods, we could go through those as well. So like I said, this was just a simple upload. I could drag and drop here, but if I want a more controlled interface, where maybe I'm asking more details from my team members as they're submitting these invoices, I could create a simple form. Again, I'm leveraging this from Teams. Fill out some required fields here. It's asking me for such information as the invoice ID, the amount. Again, an upload to that invoice. Go ahead and find that on my computer, upload the invoice, and then put in any associated comment that I want. Again, this is very much a configurable form. I could capture any of the details I want. If I want to have something like project number or PO, I can most certainly capture those on this submission as well. So again, these are all methods in which we're basically leveraging a check request. In other words, the invoices are coming from more internal team members. There's also the ability to do that from an app as well. So in this case, I have an application that is using the Power App framework, of which I could fill out here. Or if I would prefer to have these invoices submitted more in a mobile fashion, I could go ahead and drag across my phone, open up the Power App platform, and complete the necessary details in order to submit this invoice to get it into the application and begin the processing associated to it. So this we happen to develop for one of our customers. That's a farm. They wanted invoices to be received as people are incurring the expenses and buying various things from the farm, and they wanted it to be mobile friendly so they could upload all these things from the comfort of their truck as they're going around and supporting the operations of the farm. So I could go ahead and take a picture of it. I have an invoice sitting here on my desk, and then accept that photo and go ahead and submit the invoice in that manner. So as I introduced at the beginning, there's all kinds of different ways I could get invoices into this system. If these are coming directly from vendors, there's also other options for that as well. Simple email. So here I have a shared inbox going to AP Automation, which is representing my accounts payable department, as well as the consulting invoice. Same invoice I submitted previously. And vendors could submit this directly from email as well. So from our perspective, it doesn't matter. All of them are ultimately going to go into that same place that you saw me upload it, which is the received invoices. So here's the one that I'm just scanning in. If I continue to refresh this screen, I'll see the one that I just submitted via email. So you can see that's been received. And as I mentioned, in addition to kicking off an OCR process and recognizing all of the key fields that are coming in on this invoice, we're also using templates within our system to assign accounts. So enough of the submission methods. We will move forward to processing of these invoices after they are received, regardless of the method. So I showed a handful there, but we'll go ahead and go to the processing queue. The processing queue is going to involve our application where all these invoices come in. And as I mentioned, we've applied templates associated to them. So if I look at all of the invoices, I can see now they're in an auto-created state. Any of the details coming from OCR have been recognized. So the invoice number, the date, the amount, it's been mapped to a company and vendor by nature of the submission method. So in this case, I used the email that I sent that email, the receipt from, to determine the vendor that's associated to in the ERP product. as well as we're performing validation against the ERP. So you can see a warning here that I already have an invoice under this number, and we're going to go ahead and update that so that becomes unique. The reason this is a duplicate is because I used the same receipt for a lot of my demos here, so it already exists for this vendor. And then I'm going to go ahead and update the posting date associated to that. Again, in addition to all of the details being captured from a metadata perspective, we are of course displaying the invoice as well. So the invoice is entirely captured too. Other things you could see here is those default allocations. Those did come from the assignment of the template. Again, we are leveraging Teams to showcase most of this if your users are not necessarily in Teams, and if I were just merely go to the website, I would see the exact same information there. So again, that's that same invoice I just modified. Again, I have the ability to drill into the actual invoice and see that. You can see I've updated the invoice number and things that I did from the Teams interface, as well as I could modify any of the accounts. Now, the one I'm showing now is really a non-PO invoice. If this was a PO invoice, I'd be doing matching as opposed to account assignment. So the interface is a little bit different. To show the real-time integration with the ERP, I'm just going to go ahead and create a PO example really quick to show you how we're in a real-time fashion pulling data from the ERP product. So something like the vendor, we're not storing any of that information within our product. Those are real-time calls to the ERP. And if I were to create this invoice manually, as opposed to the other submission methods that we just discussed, we see we really support 3 types of invoices. A receipt match, otherwise known as a two-way match in your ERP, an invoice match, where a shipment has already been posted, or an allocation, in other words, a non-PO invoice. If I were to add items for PO matching, we're querying the ERP application and giving you the ability to add those items directly from the data that exists in the ERP. So we're leveraging those POs that have already been created, and I could add those again in a live query fashion in real time to the invoice. So a little bit different depending on the type of invoice that's coming into the system. So I'll go ahead and go back to the one that I previously submitted from Teams, just to focus on that one. Again, I could use the submission method to kick off a workflow associated to this. If the invoice comes in and everything is already known and doesn't need to be edited or reviewed from accounts payable perspective, we could automatically kick off the workflow as well. So I'm going to go ahead and submit it. By submitting it, we are going to utilize the Power Automate workflow tool to route this for review and approval. So we have a workflow configuration within our product. My workflow happens to be cost center based, so this invoice will be applied to a threshold and go to various cost center reviewers for review and approval. Again, just to jump back to Teams here. So now moving forward through that step, you could see here I received a notification coming from my Teams feed. If I were to click on that, you can see I have a new invoice that's ready for approval. Depending on my permissions, I may want to drill back and edit this, or I could approve or reject it. If I were to go to my channel, I could also see it directly from there as well. Let's go back and leave my feeds and go to my team here and go to my reviews. So what I'll see here is that same request, again, leveraging that Power Automate interface for that invoice review and approval. So again, I have the ability to look at the attachment, approve or reject it, maybe reassign it to a different reviewer, or click a link and edit it directly in our review product. If I'm not hanging out in Teams and I'm more of an email Outlook type person, I also received a notification directly to my Outlook inbox. So you can see here I have a new invoice ready to review. And as that comes up, we'll see that the invoice has been included on this, as well as some extrapolation of the metadata assigned. So here I'm seeing details from the invoice, and the ability to approve or reject it. The drill back capability gives reviewers functionality to review the invoice as it's going through the workflow. So if your reviewers are important to assigning such things as accounts and participating in the PO match capability, by me clicking this link, it's going to go ahead and update or open up another window here showing the details of the invoice, including the allocation. From the reviewer screen, I could obviously see the invoice itself, as well as a full audit history. So the workflow is generating an audit report of each step in the approval process. Any reviewer notes that have been entered along the way, as I am the first reviewer, there's no notes at this time. And then lastly, the ability to add attachments as it's going through the review process. So maybe I want to add a bill of lading or a shipping document, something to substantiate this as it's going through the review process. I can most certainly add any supporting documentation as well. And then last but not least, there is a mobile app associated to this as well. So if your reviewers would prefer to review it in a mobile app, Microsoft gives us a Power Automate app where I could look at all of my invoices that are ready for review and approval. Again, click the review link, look at the attachment, and then approve or reject it directly from my mobile phone. For the sake of today, I'll go ahead and use this email, just given it's up in front of me, and I'll say, oh, this looks good. And I'll go ahead and submit that review. Again, the reviewer options, very similar to the submission methods, is entirely up to you. You know, people work differently. Some people prefer to work in teams. Other people prefer to have their email open the whole time. And others would rather just see a queue of all of the invoices. All of those are, of course, possible. If you watch my screen there, I did get a notification that this has been final approved. And what that means is the invoice has now gone through the workflow process and fully integrated with the ERP product. So if I were just to go back to this web dashboard here, you can see my invoice is still under review. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my screen just so I could get the latest status because I did leave it open. See, the invoice actually dropped out of my queue, but if I remove my filter here, I can see the status of it has now been updated to submitted. What that means is we have integrated this invoice with the ERP system as it has gone through the final stage in the workflow, basically a step that we call the final review or the final approval, basically just the last person in that workflow. Again, for the sake of simplicity, I kept a really simple workflow there just with a single tier approval. If you want more steps, of course, that's possible, but for the sake of getting through this in the time I have allocated, I keep the workflow pretty simple. If I were to look at this invoice just to see what's captured as it's gone through the workflow process, you can see here I have some notes. Those are the reviewer notes that were entered as it went through the workflow. The audit log has been populated for each step in the approval process. So I've captured not only who was it assigned to, but then the outcome, whether or not they approved or rejected that. If they would have rejected that invoice, of course, it would have just gone back to the submitter to go ahead and handle that and resubmit it. In my case, I wanted to fully approve it, so it continued to go through the workflow process. The other thing to note about this dashboard is we are applying permissions based on the reviewers. So if I were to go into this dashboard, not only as an AP person, but more as a manager, I would only see those invoices that are pertinent to me. So I could obviously look at where they are in the workflow, look at the audit logs, not only from an AP perspective, but also from a managerial perspective to monitor the invoices that maybe I was part of the approval process. The attachments is where any supporting attachments would show. I didn't add any, so that's currently blank. And then the last tab is the transaction that has just been created in your ERP product. Like I said, we do offer various ERP integrations. This one that I'm showcasing today is a Microsoft Dynamics product, but you can see that transaction as well as the status of the invoice in a real-time query from the ERP. So as that invoice becomes posted and paid in the ERP product, I will see the latest and greatest status of that invoice. So just going back to our presentation here and beginning to wrap this up, trying to keep us on time. So go ahead and share my presentation again. As I mentioned, we were going to go through these 3 steps. The receipt, we showed the different methods coming in from email, upload from Teams, a check request form that I populated, a mobile entry, etc. So all of those various options. We kicked it off for workflow. We used templates in our system to default accounts, routed it for approval. And then that third and final step was bringing that in as an approved invoice directly in our ERP product. Again, the advantage of our products is if you look at the various components that are involved in invoice automation, there's ERP integration. Obviously, we need to get PO data, the vendor information, the account assignments, etc., directly from the ERP. We need a repository by which we could store these details, obviously archive invoices, have them searchable, etc. We need OCR capability to recognize various features and extrapolate data from those invoices. And then lastly, we need a workflow engine for routing and approval. The advantage of using this Office 365 framework is a vast majority of this functionality comes from the products that you already own with your Office 365 subscription. So really what DynamicPoint is adding to this is our app, which is really providing that tie-in to the ERP and specific invoice functionality, such as PO matching, account assignment, templates, and things of that nature, or the bulk of the work, such as the repository, the workflow OCR, is all coming from this Office 365 framework. So again, just sort of like an app that you install on your mobile phone that's leveraging such things as the camera and things like that, all of that is being provided to us by the Office 365 platform. Running out of time, so I just wanted to go ahead and thank you everyone for joining. If you have any interest in our product, our email is listed there at info@dynamicpoint.com, our website, of course, as well as my personal email. Again, thank you everyone for taking time out of the day. I very much appreciate it. We'll go ahead and follow up with my email contact if you have any questions. Thank you, have a great day and a great rest of your week. Take care.